He is known as the Prince of Darkness, but this morning, for the first time, legendary rocker Ozzy Osbourne, alongside his wife and manager Sharon.
Nobody in that auditorium knew three things that night. That 14-year-old Danny Morrison had buried both his parents just 18 months earlier, taken by a house fire while he was at a friend's house. That the worn guitar trembling in his hands was the only piece of his father he had left. And that somewhere in row Z, seat 47, hidden under a black hoodie and a pulled low cap, sat one of rock history's greatest legends, completely unrecognized, completely silent. Danny's hands shook. His voice disappeared. The stage swallowed him whole. Then a figure stood up from the back row and started walking. Stay with us. What happened next changed both their lives forever. The stage that felt like a trap. It was March 2018. Britain's Got Talent auditorium in London held close to 2,000 people, and every single seat was filled. Danny Morrison stood at the center of the stage, gripping his father's old acoustic guitar so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. His worn Converse sneakers, the same pair he had on the night his parents died, were planted on the floor as if someone had nailed them there. He could not step forward. He could not step back. The judges sat about 30 feet away. Simon Cowell leaned forward with that particular expression he carried into every audition. Not cruel exactly, but already forming a conclusion. Amanda Holden offered a careful smile. Alicia Dixon and David Walliams sat quietly, waiting. Behind them, 2,000 strangers filled rows stretching all the way to the back wall. And in the very last row, row Z, seat 47, a man sat with his cap pulled low and his collar turned up. No one around him had looked twice. He was just another face in a crowd. That was exactly what he wanted. Ozzy Osbourne had come to the taping as a guest of one of the producers, a friend of his daughter Kelly. He had no plans to speak to anyone, no plans to be recognized, just one quiet evening away from everything. But something about the boy standing frozen under those stage lights made him sit up straighter. He had seen this before. Not stage fright, something heavier than that. The particular stillness of someone carrying a weight that has nothing to do with singing or performing. He had spent 50 years reading performers, understanding the difference between nerves and genuine pain. This boy was drowning right there under the lights, and nobody was moving. But the silence that grew cruel. Danny opened his mouth to introduce himself. Nothing came out. Every word he had rehearsed in the bathroom mirror of his foster home, every sentence, every practiced pause vanished. His mind went completely blank, like a page wiped clean. 10 seconds passed, then 15, then 20. Someone in the audience coughed. A few people shifted in their seats. That particular discomfort of watching someone struggle in public secondhand embarrassment started moving through the crowd like a slow, cold current. "Take your time, love," Amanda called out, her voice echoing in the large space. But time was making it worse. Every second that passed was another second of failure, stacking on top of the last. Danny could feel the heat rising in the back of his neck, the prickly spread of panic across his skin. So he had almost not come today at all. His foster mother, Carol, had spent 3 weeks persuading him. That morning, she had driven him 3 hours down from Birmingham in her old Ford Focus, stopping once for tea and once because Danny asked her to pull over so he could breathe. Carol sat in the 4th row now, hands pressed together, watching. "Perhaps you'd like to just start playing," Simon said. His tone carried the impatience of someone managing a schedule with 200 more auditions still to get through. Danny's fingers moved to the strings, pure muscle memory from hundreds of nights alone in his room. He positioned his hands for the first chord. His fingers were shaking so badly that they landed on the wrong frets. The sound that came out was wrong, discordant and raw, so someone in the front row visibly winced. Danny saw it. That single flash of a stranger's second-hand embarrassment snapped the last thin thread of courage he had been holding. His hands dropped to his sides. His head went down. "I can't," he whispered into the microphone, so quietly that most of the room didn't even catch it. "I'm sorry. I can't do this." And then, in row Z, a figure stood up. The man who walked out of the last row. He did not wave. He did not call out. He simply stood up from seat 47 and began walking down the aisle toward the stage, footsteps steady, pace unhurried, like someone who had already made up his mind. The first few people near him barely registered the movement. Then someone looked twice. Then a gasp. Then another. Then the gasps started connecting one person to the next, spreading through all 2,000 people in seconds. Danny heard the noise from the stage but didn't understand it. He was still standing with his head down, wanting nothing more than to disappear quietly. He heard Amanda say something. He heard Simon push back from his chair something. Those close to the show would later note, he rarely did. He heard the crowd shifting from uncomfortable silence into something louder and electric. He didn't look up. "Excuse me, mate." A voice came from the direction of the stage steps. That Birmingham accent, distinctive, shaped by decades of performance, cut cleanly through everything. "Mind if I join you up there for a minute?" Danny's head snapped up fast. Standing at the bottom of the stage steps, one hand on the railing, was Ozzy Osbourne. Not a poster. Not a photograph from a bedroom wall. The actual man, at 5 feet away, was looking up at Danny with an expression the boy had not expected at all. Understanding. The auditorium came completely apart. People on their feet, phones out, the neat structure of a talent show taping dissolving in real time. Security appeared at the sides of the stage, uncertain whether to stop this or step aside. The production team in the booth went quiet, nobody issuing instructions, everyone just watching the monitors. They let the moment run. Ozzy was already climbing the steps. He crossed the stage at the same steady pace he had walked down the aisle. No performance, no drama, until he was standing directly in front of Danny. Close enough for the boy to see every detail. The deep lines around Ozzy's eyes from a life lived at full intensity, and the slight tremor in his hands from the Parkinson's he had been living with for years, and the complete absence of anything condescending or performed in his face. Up close, he looked like someone who understood what it felt like to be underwater. What he said that broke everything open. "You know that guitar you're holding?" Ozzy said quietly, not projecting for the microphone, speaking only to Danny. "That's not just a guitar, is it?" Danny's eyes filled immediately. He shook his head. "It belonged to someone important," Ozzy continued. "Someone you lost." "My dad," Danny whispered. Then, after a short pause, "Both my parents. They died 18 months ago. House fire. I was sleeping at a friend's house. They were home." The auditorium went silent again. But this silence was completely different from the one before. 2,000 people holding their breath, aware that what they were watching was not scripted, not rehearsed, not part of any plan. The cameras kept rolling. Nobody in the production booth spoke. Ozzy reached out and placed his hand on the body of the guitar, right where a father's hand would have rested when he first showed his son how to hold it. "I lost my father when I was young too," he said, his voice carrying now without being raised. "John Thomas Osbourne. He worked night shifts at a factory his whole life, worked himself down to nothing." He paused. "The grief doesn't leave," he continued. I won't tell you it does, because it doesn't. But here's what I've learned over 50 years: it becomes part of the music. Every note I've ever sung carries pieces of the people I've lost. That's not a weakness. That's how we keep them alive. Danny was crying openly now. Tears were running down his face, and he had stopped trying to hide them. Carol in the fourth row had both hands over her mouth. "But I can't do this," Danny said, his voice fracturing on the last word. "Standing here, trying to sing his song in front of all these people, I'm just a foster kid who can't get through one chord without falling apart." Ozzy held his gaze and didn't rush to fill the silence. "You think I have never stood in front of thousands of people and felt like I was going to crack into pieces?" he said. "Strength is not about staying in one piece. It's about breaking and taking the next step anyway." He reached out and gently took the guitar from Danny's hands, slowly, carefully, the way you handle something that belongs to someone else's life. And he checked the tuning with 3 quiet strums, made one small adjustment, and looked out at the crowd for a moment before turning back. "This young man came here tonight carrying more weight than any 14-year-old should have to carry," Ozzy said to the room. "He lost everything, and somehow he still found enough in himself to walk out onto this stage. That takes more courage than anything I've ever done." The audience responded. Ozzy held one hand up. "But courage doesn't mean going at it alone." He looked at Danny. "What if we do this together? If your voice goes, I carry it. If your hands shake, mine shake too. Trust me on that one. We get through this song for your dad. What do you say?" Danny stared at him. "Okay," he said, then louder, finding something from somewhere deep. "Yes, see, let's do it." The song that was never about winning, Ozzy handed the guitar back and positioned himself just to Danny's left, close enough that their shoulders were nearly touching. He nodded once. "Start whenever you're ready. I'm right here." Danny's hands went to the strings. This time they did not shake as badly. He found the first chord, got it right. The second, right again. The third, and then the opening of "Mama, I'm Coming Home," filled the auditorium. Simple, clear. Each note placed with care, the way you carry something fragile. Ozzy came in on the first line, that familiar voice, the one that had carried through arenas and stadiums for over 50 years, and he sang it soft, sang it gently, leaving room. After the first line, he stopped, nodded at Danny. "Your turn." Danny opened his mouth, and his voice came out thin at first, trembling, barely above a whisper. But it came out. He sang about Mama, about coming home, and every word felt like it was addressed somewhere specific, not at the judges or the cameras or the 2,000 people watching. Somewhere much further away than that. They traded back and forth, verse by verse. Ozzy supported, never overwhelming, always leaving Danny as much space as the boy could hold. Their voices sat differently in the room, one weathered and worn, one young and cracked and full of grief, but together they held each other up. It was not a perfect performance. Danny's pitch wavered on the high notes. His guitar playing was basic. His voice broke twice. None of that mattered. On the final chorus, Ozzy stepped back. Danny stood alone in front of 2,000 people and sang the last chorus with his whole chest. His voice was steadier than it had been all evening. It carried 18 months of grief and somehow turned it into something the room could hold. And the last note faded. There was one full second of silence. Then the auditorium rose. People on their feet. Amanda crying openly at the judges' table, not performing, actually crying. Even Simon, who had sat through more auditions than almost anyone alive, looked like something had reached through his professional distance and found him. Ozzy pulled Danny into a hug. and the boy let himself go, all the tension from the last 18 months releasing at once, right there on stage, in front of everyone. He sobbed into Ozzy's shoulder. Ozzy held him, one hand on the back of his head. "You did it," he said quietly into the boy's ear. "Your dad would be so proud of you." The vote was unanimous. 4 yeses. And Danny Morrison was through to the next round. But the number on the scorecard was the smallest thing that happened that night. Who Danny Morrison became. What almost nobody knew that night was what Ozzy did after leaving the studio. He called his manager. He called Sharon. And then, quietly, no press release, no cameras, no announcement, he set up an education trust fund for Danny Morrison. Not as a story, not as publicity, just as something that needed to be done, handled through lawyers and kept private. Danny made it to the semi-finals of Britain's Got Talent that year. He did not win the competition. He kept playing anyway. At 17, he released his first EP. At 18, he signed a record deal. He became an active voice for children in the UK foster care system. He working with music programs in Birmingham and London that provided instruments and lessons to kids who had no other access to them. Before he became any of those things, he was a boy named Daniel James Morrison. Born in 1994 in Halesowen, a small town just outside Birmingham, the only child of Patrick and Ruth Morrison. His father, Patrick, worked as a carpenter and spent his evenings playing guitar classic rock, mostly. Black Sabbath, Ozzy, songs he sang in the car on long drives with his son sitting in the back seat. Ruth Morrison taught primary school. She was the one who pushed Danny to practice, who sat with him through the frustrated early months when chords wouldn't come, and his fingers hurt, and he wanted to quit. "Your hands have to learn before your head does," she used to tell him. In October 2016, while Danny was at a friend's house for the night, a fire started in the kitchen of the family home. Both Patrick and Ruth Morrison died before the fire brigade arrived. Danny was 14 years old. He moved into foster care 3 weeks later. Carol Whitfield, his foster mother, was a retired nurse who had fostered 11 children over the years. She heard him playing guitar late one night, those slow and quiet rock songs filtering through the walls of her house, and she recognized something in it, not technical skill, but the sound of someone trying to keep the pieces of themselves from scattering completely. It was Carol who found the Britain's Got Talent audition listing, Carol who filled out the application, Carol who drove him to London on a cold March morning and stopped twice on the motorway because he needed air. In 2023, 5 years after that evening in the auditorium, Danny Morrison walked onto the stage at Villa Park in Birmingham as part of the opening act for Ozzy Osbourne's farewell concert. He was 19 years old, with a record deal and an EP and 2 years of advocacy work behind him. He walked out carrying his father's guitar. The black pick with silver lettering was in his pocket. He played "Mama, I'm Coming Home." The whole thing, steady hands, full voice, every note exactly where he meant it to land. Ozzy watched from the wings. This story was never really about a talent show. It was never about a famous name stepping out of a back row. It was about a 14-year-old who had lost everything and still found enough left in himself to walk onto a stage. And about a man who, when he could have stayed invisible, I chose not to. One moment of genuine human connection, that's all it was, and it shifted the direction of an entire life. Every single one of us can be that person for someone. To stand up from row Z and start walking. If this story stayed with you, hit the like button. It helps more people find it. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And drop a comment below. Has someone ever shown up for you when you needed it most? Share that story. Someone reading it today might need to hear it.